Greetings. This is Doc Ock coming at you live and direct this evening from Black Facts Headquarters Central here in Kent, Ohio. The only state in the union that begins the same way it ends, with a big fat zero. Settle, settle, settle. Every single day. That's how we do it here in the big Ohio. Meanwhile, let's get on with the getting on. You know what we came to do. You know what you need to do. If you haven't done it already, go ahead and subscribe to the Tubular Black Facts channel. If you've done that already, then maybe you just want to go ahead and make a donation to the cause. That would be excellent. You can do that too. Just look for the links. There'll be a link on the page where you see it on Facebook, where you see our videos on Facebook, the links to the YouTube channel. You can also find a link on the in the YouTube description box for each of our videos. And you can also find one at our website, www.blakfacts.org. Any one of those locations will do everybody just fine. You and I and everybody else as well. And we'll just be sitting here feeling real fly. In the meantime, let's carry on by sharing with you some words of wisdom from the mind of Dr. Edward W. Crosby, the father of Black History Month. And today's words of wisdom are, if you're going to do it, let's do it. If you're going to do it, let's do it. Simple as that. If you're going to do it, let's do it. These are some of the tropes that Dr. Crosby always liked to say all the way up till his dying day. Now, let's see what we got here for you today when it comes to the voice of freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer. The voice of freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer. Let's see what we got for you in the form of a poem. Okay, we read that one already. We'll skip that one. We'll go on to this one right here. Motherhood. Motherhood. In 1954, me and Pap adopted 2 little girls. I sang spirituals to Dorothy Jean and Virgie Ree, just like my mama had done to me. In 1961, a doctor tricked me into an operation to supposedly remove a growth. When I got up from that surgery, I found that the doctor's knife cut more than a small tumor. He had removed the parts that God gave me to bring children into the world. I would never have babies of my own. A Mississippi law at that time said po folks had no business making babies. That law may have taken my womb, but no one was going to take my voice. Now, ain't that something? And here her mama had 20 children, and she couldn't have not a one. Why? Because of a doctor. It does make you wonder sometimes when they tell us we need to trust doctors today. Should we or shouldn't we? I'll let you decide that. Meanwhile, let's go ahead reading on in our book, Oh Freedom. I promised last night I would read a section of the book other than the interviews that are in here. There's some other information. So let's read a little bit because this tells us something about segregation. So we're going to read about segregation. What was segregation like? What was it all about? And I asked the question yesterday, how would someone black know which toilet, which bathroom, which seat to sit in, which water fountain to use if in fact they could not read? Because all the signs, none of the signs had pictures, they just had words. So if you can't read, how would you know which one you're supposed to use? Interesting question when you think about it. Black people were also deprived of their legal rights. They were often tried and convicted of crimes without a lawyer to represent them, even though a lawyer's help is a right guaranteed to every American by the Sixth Amendment. The southern states kept black people from voting by requiring them to take a test that was designed in such a way that no one could possibly pass that test. It wasn't just that the questions were hard, some of them had no answers. A famous question of the time is this one right here. Oops, almost forgot to start my slideshow. Let me not forget to start the slideshow. There we go. Oh, not quite. There. Now. Okay. All right, now we're ready. Okay. Start that. Up and over. Boom. Okay, now, where was I at? Oh, yeah. It wasn't just that the questions were hard, they were impossible to answer. A famous question of the time was, how many soap bubbles can you blow from a cake of ivory soap? And if black people did manage to register, they were often required to pay a fee called a poll tax before being allowed to vote. African Americans could even be arrested for uppity behavior, the same behavior that was praised as ambition, self-respect, or pride in a white person. Worse still, throughout the South, black people who opposed segregation were often dragged from their houses at night, beaten, and even murdered. The system of segregation was kept in place by fear. We often think of the civil rights movement, the organized efforts to end segregation and guarantee equality for African Americans, as beginning with Martin Luther King Jr. and the protest marches of the 1960s. But some black folks began challenging segregation as early as the 1800s, when Homer Plessy was arrested in 1892 for riding in the white section of a train in Louisiana. His case went to the Supreme Court. Instead of finding that Louisiana's segregation laws violated the U.S. Constitution, which they did, the court ruled in 1896 that blacks and whites could be separated in all public accommodations, places like train cars, hotels, restaurants, and even schools, as long as the services offered were, quote unquote, equal. This became known as the separate but equal doctrine, and it was used to justify and uphold state segregation laws for more than one half of an entire century, over 50 years. Why didn't black people just leave the South? Hundreds of thousands did, moving north to Chicago, Detroit, New York, and other big cities, but many Northerners, instead of welcoming them, feared that blacks would take their jobs away. Northern states had few Jim Crow laws, but discrimination, the unfair treatment of people because of prejudices about them, was just as strong against blacks in the North as it was in the South. In the states outside the South, black people were not legally segregated, but they were still denied decent housing, health care, and education. Prejudice and custom kept them from attending white schools or living in white neighborhoods. Now, that part that they're saying right there, yeah, that's really untrue. As a matter of fact, segregation outside of the South was widely practiced. Why was it widely practiced? It was widely practiced as a form of appeasement. In other words, everybody wanted them Southern dollars. Everybody, every state, every business wanted that Southern money. They wanted that Southern tourist dollar. So therefore, when those Southerners came north, they didn't want to upset anybody. They didn't want to. They didn't want to rock the boat. They wanted to make sure those nice, white, Southern gentlemen and ladies felt comfortable. And the only way to do that is to make sure that things up north were very similar, if not just the same, as they were down south. And so they definitely put in place policies that they didn't necessarily have laws, but in social, in fact, in actual fact, in the real reality, in practice, yeah, it was business as usual. Business as usual. With black folks sitting on the backs of the buses, black folks working as domestics in homes all over the North, black folks in segregated housing, being forced to live in certain neighborhoods, not allowed to live in other neighborhoods, redlined out. There were even some cases where black folks that happened to be able to move into a neighborhood that was not, quote unquote, a black neighborhood, that when the authorities got wind of it, they actually picked their house up and relocated the house to the right neighborhood. Now, if you can imagine that, you living in the house, you done bought the house, and the city comes and says, we're so sorry, but we need to move your house. And literally pick your house up, lock, stock, and barrel, and relocate it to another part of town. This is real reality. So what they're saying here, that is the myth, but it doesn't represent real reality. In real reality, things up north were not that much different, and in fact are not that much different today than they were then. They may have appeared a little different, but in real reality, it was pretty much the same. You might not have seen the signs, those colored only signs, but when you go to the restaurant and the waitress never comes around to your table to get your order, well, you know something just ain't quite right. And you don't know if it's you or if it's the waitress or what, until you sat there for a while and it dawns on you that the waitress ain't coming. You're not going to get served. So, at any rate, we'll continue on reading from the book after that aside. Following an unwritten law of behavior toward black folks, real estate agents did not take them to see homes in white neighborhoods, and most African Americans were forced to live separately in ghettos, which were usually the poorest parts of the city. Black people were prevented from joining labor unions that could help them get better jobs. Now, they keep putting this in the past, but I've seen this happening in the present, not in the past. Friends of mine have told me that they were, one was a neurosurgeon and the other was a dentist. They're a married couple. And the house they wanted to look at, in the neighborhood they wanted to look at, the real estate agent refused to take them to those houses. Wouldn't take them to those houses even to look at the houses. And if they did take them to the house, the bank wouldn't approve their loan. Matter of fact, they denied them a loan one time. They said they were denying the loan because they were late on a payment of an electric bill 1 month. And therefore, their credit was no good, and they were not going to be able to get the loan to buy the house in the neighborhood that they wanted. And if they wanted to move into another neighborhood, that'd have been fine. Just not the neighborhood they wanted to live in. The only way they were finally able to get the house in the neighborhood they wanted, they changed real estate agents and actually had the people, they never met the real estate agent. They would say they were too busy because he's a neurosurgeon. Said he was too busy, and he would have a courier bring over paperwork and pictures or whatever they needed to get They would do it all by courier instead of meeting with the real estate agent. So nobody knew that the family was black until all the paperwork was ready to go, and they just had to go to the bank and sign the final paperwork. The people at the bank were in absolute shock with their mouths dropped. Where am I talking about? Where did this happen at? I'm talking about Seattle, Washington, one of the quote unquote most liberal spots in the country. And when am I talking about? I'm not talking about in the 1880s or the 1950s, not even the 1960s. I'm talking in the 1990s. These kinds of things were still going on. So who's to say that they've stopped today? If I were you, I'd pay attention to what's going on around you. Okay? During World War II, 1939 to 1945, U.S. troops were segregated, but black soldiers fought and died overseas just like white soldiers did. Black women also contributed to the war effort by working in factories and other wartime jobs. When the war ended, black people hoped that because of their patriotism, courage, and accomplishments, they would finally be accepted as equal in America. But in the South, they found they could still be arrested for drinking from a white water fountain. And in the North, they could enter a department store and still not be allowed to try on a hat. It all added up to the same thing: denial of our rights as citizens and denial of the respect that we had earned by our efforts in the war. It didn't matter how brave we had been or how hard working we were in civilian life. As you will read in the following stories, segregation is still a brutal reality in America, and people continue to suffer from discrimination because of the color of our skin. And I think I'm going to end right about there. Seems like a good spot to end at. If that sounded kind of harsh, I didn't mean it to be harsh. If it didn't sound like a children's story that you're used to hearing, that's only because it ain't. Because our children need to hear some stories about real reality and not just some talk about when you see the cops, make yourself small like a mouse. Don't make any sudden moves. Put your hands up onto the dashboard. Stick your arms out the window. Okay, you can have that talk if you want to, but it's way more than that. There's a lot more happening than that. And why is it that we have to think about that and pass it on to our children anyway? That sounds like the same kind of stuff that was going on when they would whip us and make all the slaves surround the area where the person was being whipped, so they could watch what was going on, to imprint those vicious images in the minds of the mothers who were going to teach the children, in the minds of the mamas who were going to breastfeed the babies, in the minds of the mamas who were going to pass on their feelings through psychic means without ever having to say a word to their children. Just like you're holding a baby and your heart rate increases every time you see a white person roll by. Things of that nature. That's what it sounds like to me, giving my child a talk. What kind of talk am I supposed to give my child? I give my talk a child about common sense. Just have some good common sense. But putting your hands out the window seems a little bit over the top to me. And believe me, I have seen people do it right here in Kent, Ohio, in my driveway. The cops pulled them over in my driveway, and I look outside and I see somebody with their arms out the window. I know doggone well they black, because white folks don't have to do that. And that's what we call, that's discrimination, that's prejudice, that's racism in America today, not 100 years ago. So think one more time if you think segregation ended already or it only happened in the South. Very untrue. So we're not going to tell that fairy tale because it's not a merry tale, and it shouldn't be something that we should be putting in the minds of our children that it all ended and it's all in the past, because it ain't. It's still with us today. Well, enough said. I think we can end right here. This is Doc Ock at noon and 9, as always, coming to you with the real, because I want y'all to know the deal. We're going to talk about things they're not going to talk about on the daily news. We're going to talk about views that people are not going to express on the daily news, because he who pays the piper calls the tune. And in this case, it's you that pay the piper. We're looking for donations from you. We're not existing on grant money. We're not getting money from the federal government. We're not getting money from the state government. We rely on your donations. If you haven't made a donation yet, don't wait till Giving Tuesday. Let's try Giving Friday, because that's what my name means, a male child born on a Friday. Let's try making a donation tomorrow or tonight, right after midnight. Make a donation now. In the meanwhile, peace out, without a doubt. Of course, with plenty of justice, because peace without justice disgusts us. Yeah, we got to have some justice. And let me just give a shout out to Brittany Melanin Wisdom Ware and Ronnie, and who else is out there? I know I saw Solomon out there. I see, looks like Fetty Red. I can't ever read that. Solomon Israel. Who else did I see out there? Dan Lecter. Oh, we got a whole host of folks up in here tonight. Tell your friends, spread the word, pass it on. Don't enjoy all this goodness all by yourselves. We'll be back here tomorrow reading more from the autobiography of Dr. Edward W. Crosby, the father of Black History Month. Until then, we hope you can continue to have a grin from your ear to your chin. In the meanwhile, we're going directly to our extra.